Aren't you guys tired of covering this? Aren't you guys tired of being here and having to cover all of these mass shootings? I'm from Highland Park, Illinois. My son and I survived a mass shooting over the summer. I am in Tennessee on a family vacation with my son, visiting my sister-in-law. I have been lobbying in D.C. since we survived a mass shooting in July. I have met with over 130 lawmakers. How is this still happening? How are our children still dying, and why are we failing them? Gun violence is the #1 killer of children and teens. It has overtaken cars. Assault weapons are contributing to the border crisis and fentanyl. We are arming cartels with our guns and our loose gun laws, and these shootings and these mass shootings will continue to happen until our lawmakers step up and pass gun safety legislation. I'm pretty sure this was an unsecured weapon that this teenager got a hold of. We can't even pass gun safety, like safe storage laws in this country to protect kids from getting a hold of weapons that they shoot each other with. Aren't you guys tired of this? Are you guys sick of it? We have to do something. We all have to call our lawmakers, and we all have to make our lawmakers make change now, or this is going to keep happening, and it's going to be your kid and your kid and your kid and your kid next, because it's just a matter of time.
That clip today is in response to the latest mass shooting in Nashville, Tennessee, where a person by the name of Aubrey Hale, who was at the age of 28, was the killer of 3 people, 3 children and 3 adults, and the children were all 9 years old, at a private Christian elementary school in Nashville, where the shooter was actually a former student. Hale was actually shot by the police during the attack. And this was the most deadliest school shooting in nearly a year. And what I want to talk about today is basically to get into a deeper, more psychological conversation regarding the nature of violence, the nature of mass shootings. And right now, the conversation is quite trivial and superficial. If you go on viral media, basically Twitter, the argument from the left is gun control. The argument from the right is basically a lack of religion in schools or in the world. And both don't really address the problem, the more deeper problem, the problem that has permeated society from its foundations. And what I want to talk today about is the psychological aspect of abject violence in the human condition, as well as psychological operations from the federal government. A little bit more conspiratorial, but it has a deep-rooted history. Nothing I'm basically going to be talking about is speculation, and everything that I'm going to be sharing with you today, I will try and do my best to give you the pertinent information in the description as always. Now, in regards to the argument of gun control by the left, I'm not totally against it, but I mean, the problem with this is that they misunderstand the Second Amendment. And I'm going to read from the Congress.gov website regarding the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment was based primarily on the right to keep and bear arms in English common law, and was influenced by the English Bill of Rights in 1689. Sir William Blackstone described this right as an auxiliary right, supporting the natural rights of self-defense and resistance to oppression, and the civic duty to act in concert in defense of the state. While both James Monroe and John Adams supported the Constitution being ratified, its most influential framer was James Madison. In Federalist number 46, Madison wrote how a federal army could be kept in check by state militias. By the way, who got rid of the militias? It's the federal government. I wonder why. A standing army would be opposed by a militia. Now, a militia was comprised of who? The people. I think it was ages 18 to 72, I believe. He argued that state militias would be able to repel the danger of a federal army. It may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstanced could ever be conquered by such a proportion of regular troops. He contrasted the federal government of the United States to the European kingdoms, which he described as afraid to trust the people with arms, and assured that the existence of subordinate governments form a barrier against the enterprise of ambition. And I think that's basically right. As long as the military, law enforcement, and government institutions, as well as the federal government, have the power to basically quell and destroy and subjugate a people, in which, do I really need to show you a history lesson of what the federal government has done abroad? Couldn't happen here in our own backyard. And of course, the left's argument would be, well, you wouldn't stand a chance. They got better weapons. They got drones. They got planes and tanks. They got nuclear weapons. Well, we have to assume that everybody in the military would actually join in on the fight against its own citizenry. This would take a long psychological toll, and I would think that in an outright coup of the people, most of the military wouldn't. However, when the military thinks that the federal government is right in keeping the peace, in allowing certain sections of society to be disarmed, because they feel that this group could threaten the existence of the existing society, well, then we have a problem. And I think this is exactly what's happening, because everybody from the left, just about in the political spectrum, when it comes to media and, of course, Congress, are all subjugating the GOP as a bunch of right-wing fanatics. And when you label somebody a terrorist, you're basically saying that they're the enemy. Don't fall for this ploy, because this is basically a false assumption. Most people are not fanatics. There is a small percentage of, unfortunately, people in the GOP who adhere to Trump's policies. And I think Trump is doing this because he is part of a system that wants to basically keep us divided, psychologically manipulated, and always needing and wanting toward the federal government. And as long as we see each other as the enemy, and as long as we see each other as a terrorist, there won't be conversation. There'll be war. And this brings me to the point regarding the right. Now you have these basically fervent evangelical Christians who basically think that the majority of society, or all of it, is secular, devil-worshiping, and also sinful people who need religion in their lives. And without this, they are basically allowing for communists and leftists and socialists and Satanists and all types of degeneracy to permeate society and destroy from within. This, too, is a false assumption. And most people in this country don't vote. I'm not buying the whole Biden and Trump turn around the clock that most people voted, because in the prior administration between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, we saw the largest non-voting bloc in history. Only to 4 years later, everyone got amnesia and started the largest voting operation in history, which is absurd in its own right, because neither Trump or Biden were really people-oriented. And Trump basically lost the election because he didn't have outreach to opposing points of view in society. Biden basically just sat there looking like a zombie, like he always does, and basically also just basically didn't go to these conservative areas and try to persuade people to join the left and say that Trump's policies are disastrous. So they kept their own to their own likings. And what happened? Oh, we saw the most votes in history by a presidential candidate, and the second most votes in presidential history to the loser, Trump. I'm not buying it. And if we can basically manipulate votes and elections overseas, what makes you think it doesn't happen here where it counts? Now, when it comes to mass shootings, there's this superficial view of mass shootings from the left and right. And what I want to do here is basically try and pique your mind a little bit, to think a little bit deeper and to think outside the box, meaning don't think of this as a left or right paradigm, as a black or white issue, a male female issue, because the mass shooter was a female. This is much bigger. This is much bigger than demographics. And of course, the media is not touching this. They don't want an educated public. And the public is basically ripped apart because we have way too many people that listen to the media. A lot of people don't read. And this is another problem. And people are basically subjugated by their divisions, by human constructs, like racism, politics, religion, sexism. And these are all transparent constructs. They don't exist. They never did. And what I mean by that is that you aren't born a racist. You aren't born of any political affiliation. You're not born of any religious affiliation. You're a human being that transcends these constructs. And when it comes to the latest mass shooting, I feel that the problems which are embedded in the fabric of our national DNA, the opposing political parties and its compromising pawns, are sidestepping the issues that proclaim the problem stems from the weapon, but not from the individual state of mind. And I believe this is a fatal mistake. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the best of my ability what I believe the primary problems that face our country and face the future. I'm only going to touch on a couple of things here, but I think, and let me know in the comment section if I'm wrong or something you disagree with. Even if you agree with most of what I'm saying and disagree with some, I like to hear opposing views, because this is what's going to make us more informed and more educated and understanding of each other, which is desperately needed. Now, the problems of abject violence, which has seemingly permeated almost every fabric of our being here in this country, and I believe the problems are multifaceted and can be traced back generations, which founded this nation under violence. Now, I'm not just picking on the United States. I think most everywhere on the face of this earth was founded under the guise of violence. I just want to talk about here in this country. And I believe this is mostly psychological. And I believe most of it's manufactured. But I don't think it's irreversible. But in order to give pause to the dilemma, we will first need a major revolt. I'm not talking about in the physical sense. Talk about the mental sense. There's a late Indian philosopher, my favorite philosopher, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who talks about this revolution, because you can't change what outward unless you change inward. And if you're inebriated by this divisive sense of politics and racism, religion, how else are you going to defeat the forces who created this sense of manipulation within you and change outward? You have to change inward first, and then have others change, which would cause a branch out effect, which would lead to a unified public. We can't fight this public based on just the left or just the right. We have to get rid of those walls and basically fight through protest through peace. Is it a wishful state of thinking? Probably. But if we live by the threat of the sword, well, as Christ said in the New Testament, those who live by the sword will die by it. Now, there are certain glaring issues in these mass shootings that have rampaged our country in the last 30 years, and which has not been addressed, like I said, by our elected officials, which is understandable due to their corporate lobbying that's involved, and our major media networks, which basically don't want an educated, unified public. Because what they want is basically to keep you afraid and to keep you needing, uneducated, uninformed, and always looking at each other like the threat. Now, one of the first problems I want to talk about is the nationwide problem of manufactured drug use by major pharmaceutical companies. I don't think this is the problem with most mass shootings. I believe it is a problem with some of them. That's why I felt the need to address this. Now, with some of the mass shootings in the last 20 years, we are noticing a problem which is seemingly repetitive but ignored, and that is which of these mass shootings carried out by disgruntled students, in which this female was an ex-student of the school, ex-students who are prescribed or have taken antidepressant medications. Now, with the latest mass shooting, I don't know if she was on medications. From the most popular mass shooting, which is the Columbine shooting in 1999, all the way to the 2012 Aurora theater massacre, we saw each of these incidents which saw the instigator of these killings were taking some form of psychotropic drugs. And I believe psychotropic medications have shown to have a profound and mind-altering effect in the short term, which is having a dynamically negative effect for the long term. And according to Dr. Peter Breggin, a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, in which I'm going to link his paper below, he has authored over 20 books and has testified in Congress about the effects of these medications, which stated plainly that, quote, depression rarely leads to violence, and that it's only since the advent of the SSRIs that come on the market that have such mass shootings have taken place through the ingestions of psychotropic drugs, end quote. And, you know, all I have to do is show you the company paper involving, in the recent years, with the latest mass shootings between the last 5 years, I'll say, whether it's taken place at a school, a university, a hospital, or any place in open public society, that had a number of these young people on prescribed medications, and it amounted to 63%, just in the last 5 years. It's a pretty large number. Now, take, for example, what I'm talking about. Who would be the benefactors of these psychotropic-induced mass shootings? Well, wouldn't they be companies like Johnson & Johnson, who in 2017 had an annual revenue of $76 billion? Or Pfizer at $52.4 billion. Or Merck & Company at $40 million. AbbVie at $28 billion. And Abbott Laboratories at $27 billion. Astounding revenues for the last 5 years. That each company saw growth upwards of over $10 billion per year for each company. And according to a CNBC report, which again I will prescribe in the description below, just in the year 2021, spending on prescription medications in the United States increased between 4 to 7% from 2019 to 2021, with an estimated $610 billion spent by the American consumer. That's about as much money as the Pentagon defense budget, in which we budget to the Pentagon every fiscal year. And with an incremental growth of young people being prescribed antidepressants, is it not leading us to an increase in pathological events which are being generated by these medications, which are having a nationwide effect that include these recent mass shootings? Compare the rates of prescribed patients of the last 30 years to the rates of mass shootings inside our learning institutions. And these statistics are related to mass shootings inside educational institutions, which are colleges, high schools, and elementary schools. Now, I'll go by each decade. I'm going to read off from the Data Wrapper article, which I'll give to you in the description. In the 1900s, we've had 13 mass shootings and 5 deaths. I'm sorry, 13 deaths and 13 deaths, 5 injured in 1 mass shooting. In the 1910s, 12 deaths, 8 injured, 19 mass shootings. The 1920s, 5 deaths, 5 injured, 10 mass shootings. 1930s, 10 deaths, 3 injured, 9 mass shootings. 1940s, 11 deaths, 4 injured, 8 mass shootings. The 1950s, 14 deaths, 8 injured, 17 mass shootings. The 1960s, 44 deaths, 64 injured, 18 mass shootings. The 1970s, 37 deaths, 73 injured, 30 mass shootings. 1990s, 89 deaths, 145 injured, 62 mass shootings. In the 2000s, 107 deaths, 138 injured, 63 mass shootings. And in the 2010s, I can't say the 2020s because we haven't done yet, 152 deaths, 150 injured, and 149 mass shootings. Almost a double jump from the 10 years prior. Now, what's consisting of mass shootings? Mass shootings, as defined by the FBI, are when 4 or more are killed, not including the shooter. And the growth rates for both mass shootings and prescribed pharmaceutical medications are not something that we should dismiss offhand, because they don't constitute all the mass shootings. But it's something that we urgently need to address, because whether you want, let's just say we leave out mass shootings for the time being, but if we talk about the problem of prescription medications and the abuse thereof, it's more of a permanent problem, more of a global problem or a nationwide problem than, say, illegal drug use. Far outweighs it. And, people are going to, jump on the other side of that fence and say, well, we don't have like a narco problem in this country. Yes, we do. They're not Mexican. They're in business suits. And they lobby Congress. They're worse than the cartels because they actually are legal. And they lobby our Congress. And therefore, Congress works on their behalf, not to the people. Now, I'm not saying everybody in the pharmaceutical industry, not everybody in the medical industry is corrupt. But there is a very dangerous percentage, whether it be 5% or 7% of people, doctors or medical professionals, who are not having our best interests or are looking at us like a dollar symbol. And I hate to say it, it sounds conspiratorial, but it's not. I'm not telling you not to go to your doctor for any problem either, or to go to your psychiatrist. But I think in order to address the problem, we have to address who's benefiting from disaster. I'm a 9/11 researcher. 3,000 people were killed on the attacks. But does that tell the whole story? No. Could the attacks have been prevented? Absolutely. Who benefit from these attacks? Just take a look at my webpage. The second problem I want to address is I think, the more prescient problem currently. And I think this is the more nefarious psychological problem. Whereas psychotropic abuse is a more linear physical problem, this is a psychological problem. That is the inherent problem of abject violence in the United States. I'll spare you the history lesson. I would say, from my experience in studying psychology, I studied forensic psychology at the City University of New York in the early 90s. I'm a voracious reader. I'm not a medical professional, so don't take that as my own opinion through my own studies of the human mind in the last 15 years. I have more books on true crime than any subject. So I'm just speaking on my unqualified opinion based on information that I've digested without any bias behind it whatsoever. And I hope that anybody who follows me knows at this point that I am not speaking to you through the colored lens of any construct, but I'm speaking at the whole level of the human consciousness. And I think the American public in the last 100 years have been saturated with violence and coverage from our film industry, the media industry, the gaming industry, which is recent, billboards, magazines, with random and deliberate acts of violence from people in this country, even violence that is considered legal. And just take a look at what has happened in the last 20 years after 9/11, which is a ripple effect of everything we're living in. The underlying general instigator of violence we are seeing today comes from an inability from those in positions of systematic influence in generally understanding the human condition. I'm talking about from the federal government to the legacy media, to the intelligence services like the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and the FBI and the CIA and the NSA. People in levels of our military and government, and even in the areas of the media and the entertainment industry, are generally conditioning in a manner which is understood as sociopathy. And what are the traits of a sociopathic mindset? And what I'm going to be reading from is basically a paper from the Psychology Today. The traits of a sociopath are: 1, superficial charm and good intelligence. A great example of this are Donald Trump and Barack Obama. Trump is more obtuse. Trump is very sociable. Trump really relates to the middle class, even though he basically grew up wealthy. He talks like somebody from the middle class and lower classes. Barack Obama is very demure. He's good looking. He's very intelligent, speaks well. But the one thing that Trump and Obama have in common is their ability to kill legally using the military. Need I remind you that it was Obama who destroyed nearly all of Syria and Libya, as well as giving military aid to the people that we were supposed to fight against the war on terror in a CIA covert operation called Timber Sycamore, in which thousands of people were killed in Damascus, the capital of Syria, to help overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad because he's a dictator. Remember what I said, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And you can't say, those of the left, that Obama was better than Bush when he wasn't. And you on the right can't basically say that Trump is better than Obama, because Trump basically drone striked more countries and dropped more bombs than Obama ever did. And Obama, before Trump, dropped more bombs and drone strike more people than any administration in history. 2, the absence of delusions and other signs of irrational thinking. Most sociopaths are not cult leaders. Those are psychopaths. A sociopath doesn't have a delusion. He actually believes that what he's doing is right. A narcissist is a sociopath. Well, who's a bigger narcissist than Donald Trump? Who's a bigger narcissist than Bill Clinton? Take a look at these people that don't see themselves as people that should be upheld by the law because of their stature. They should feel that they are better than a common person. This is what happens when a person reaches a certain level of power. The farther you go up the totem pole, the lower, the further away you become at the bottom, where most people are. Never forget where you come from. 3, absence of nervousness or neurotic manifestations. Most sociopaths don't have psychological delusions or delusions of grandeur. 4, unreliability. How do you rely on the sociopath? Same thing. How do you rely on the President of the United States? I would label most presidents as sociopaths. 5, untruthfulness and insincerity. 6, lack of remorse or shame. 7, inadequately motivated antisocial behavior. Can you say that any president in history has any common ground with the very common people? And finally, 8, poor judgment and failure to learn by experience. Don't you notice a repetitive problem in this country that never seems to be solved? Now, these notable symptoms are often seen by people all around us, but are often ignored for a varying number of reasons, which lead us to usually ignore the problem at hand. With over 330 million people in this country, a number that continues to rise modestly every quarter year is the trend of mental health. And it has increased in the very wrong direction. And with the latest COVID pandemic and crisis that followed with it, and all these, most of these mandates that served other than no purpose than to destroy society through the business sense, psychological sense, I can't tell you how many people have been affected by this mentally, in all ages. According to Parenthon FY, which is a leading consulting firm, the investment spending on mental health clinics in the United States by the year 2024 will reach an all-time high of $250 billion. With 50,000 psychiatrists and 20,000 treatment centers available to the general public. In other words, in the next few years, we're going to see an exponential growth in spending on the mental health clinics, hospitals, physicians, and their amenities in the next somewhere between 3 to 5 years. The emerging market in these areas are rapidly increasing, and government spending on these clinics have well reached past the goals. And these fiscal year budgets alluding to the, let's say, the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry, have broke through the wall. But the leading economic breakthrough has been the pharmaceutical industry, with annual profits growing each and every year. The history of this nation has been wrought with war and physical confrontations based upon a sense of nationalist pride, a sense of geopolitical aggression, and through the divisive constructs of religion, race, politics, and sexism. Something that I've mentioned previously in this video, that is the danger that we pose upon ourselves. This is also the only difference between our political institutions. Yes, they'll agree on healthcare. Yes, they'll agree on Social Security. Yes, they'll agree on bills passing regarding certain sexes, regarding the protection of religious and atheistic institutions. But when it comes to the more important areas, such as geopolitics, such as our foreign lobby institutions, such as the Pentagon, such as appeasing global and foreign governments, when it comes to war, when it comes to defense spending, there is no such thing as left and right paradigm. There's only one government, and there always has been. This belief that there's conservative and liberal values, those are all gone. And those who lived under the oppression of authoritarianism and totalitarianism are telling you that you no longer live in a free society. Just recently, we have this ridiculous congressional investigation regarding TikTok and this fascination from the right regarding China being invasive on our national security. My goodness, do you really need a historical education about recent times and what the NSA is currently doing to us? Not just here, but all around the world. Google Five Eyes community. I dare you. Google Utah Data Center. I dare you. The collection of data by our own government supersedes any foreign government. In fact, most of these governments under the Five Eyes are working in conjunction with each other about collecting information from us in every aspect of our lives, every second of the day, every day of the week, every week of the year, forever. And you allowed this to happen by supporting the federal government, by supporting these congressional institutions with your vote and money. And you have the right, that you have the audacity to complain about TikTok and the banning thereof. I hate TikTok more than anything, but I'm against the banning of anything. I want it to be my right to choose whether to watch TikTok or not. Just like you should have that right. And the problem with abject violence is that since the start of the 20th century in the United States, the U.S. has been at war for 49 years, with a break of only 3. And since the start of the 20th century, we've been involved in 46 wars. That is quadruple the amount regarding countries such as Russia, China, North Korea, India, Great Britain, Pakistan. This is one war every 2.5 years. An unbelievably staggering number of consistency involving human conflict and dominion, which leads to a total, complete destruction of civilizations. And according to Stephen Taylor, a senior lecturer in psychology at the Leeds Beckett University, in which I'm going to definitely put this paper in the description, the psychology of violence is seemingly based on two areas: group identity and the need for increase in wealth, status, and power. And this paper is fantastic in describing that. There also lies the problem of sociopathy in the human condition, as I outlined, along with human dominion. This area is not often the fault of the individual, due in part of it stemming from a irreversible condition of the brain itself. So I'm not going to blame some people who have a condition which leads to prone to violence. Now, psychologists from around the world are coming to the conclusion that the DNA from our parents are also bringing its offspring its mental consciousness at some level. Now, I've learned this through the study of serial killers and the pathology of the sociopath is witnessed in social circles that I've learned about with serial killers. But society often finds itself in ignorance of these symptoms. We really don't know anything about our fellow man. Heck, we don't know much about our neighbor because we've been psychologically programmed to believe that people around us could be an enemy. He might be voting red. He might be voting blue. He might be a Christian. Hell, he might be a Muslim, a Jew. He might be black. He might be white. He might be transsexual. He might be heterosexual. He might be homosexual. We're all made to look at each other as if we're another alien from another race around the world. And this is due in part to too much watching TV. I had one of the best conversations I've ever had. It wasn't even 9/11 related. And it was a conversation I had with Patrick McFarlane, formerly of Liberty Weekly. That's where the podcast was based on. Now it's Virtual Descent. This guy's great. I love this guy. His channel is great. And we were talking about psychological operations by the legacy media. And one thing about last year, The Verge basically wrote an article in September 18, 2022, in which the title is "The Pentagon has ordered a review of U.S. psychological operations on social media." I'm going to leave that in description as well. And what did I talk with regarding Patrick McFarlane? We talked about psychological operations. Operations like MK Ultra, Project Bluebird, and the psychological operations that are involved with it, whether they be strategic, operational, or tactical. But there's color-coded products. PSYOPs involve the careful creation and dissemination of a product message. And there are three types of these products. They are used to create these messages. They include white products, which are used in overt operations, gray and black products, which are used in covert psychological operations. And in order for a psychological operation to be successful, they must be based in reality, not in fantasy. That's a different form of psychological operation. And that comes from manipulation and total dissemination of half-truths or falsehoods. I'm not talking about that here. I'm talking about messages that must be consistent and they must not contradict each other. Any gap between the product and the reality will be quickly noticed by the public. A credible truth must be presented which is consistent to all the audiences. Now, when it comes to a white psychological operation, this is attributed to psychological operations as a source. White psychological operations is acknowledged as an official statement or an act of the U.S. government or emanates from a source associated closely enough with the U.S. government to reflect an official viewpoint. The information should be true and factual. It also includes all output identified as coming from official U.S. sources. Authorized to engage in white psychological operations activity directed at foreign audiences are from the State Department, the Foreign Operations Administration, the Defense Department, and other U.S. government departments and agencies as necessary. Gray psychological operations are basically a true source, which is from the U.S. government, that is not revealed to the target audience. The activity engaged in plausibly appears to emanate from a non-official American source or an indigenous, non-hostile source, where there may be no attribution. Gray information is information whose content is such that the effect will be increased if the hand of the U.S. government, and in some cases any American participation, are not revealed. That means it must be hidden. It is simply a means for the U.S. to present viewpoints which are in the interest of U.S. foreign policy. This sounds familiar? This is what's happening with Syria, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Ukraine. Black psychological operations. Now, this activity engaged in appears to emanate from a source, whether it's from a government, a party, a group, an organization, or even a person, which are usually hostile in nature. The interest of the U.S. government is concealed. That means they have plausible deniability, and the U.S. government would always deny responsibility if found out. It is best used in support of strategic aims. Now, covert black psychological operations are not a function of the U.S. military, but instead is used in special operations, usually by the CIA, due to their political sensitivity and need for higher level compartmentalization. That means very few people are in the need to know. Furthermore, black psychological operations, in order for it to be credible, may need to disclose sensitive material with the damage caused by information disclosure considered to be outweighed by the impact of a successful deception. In order to achieve maximum results and to prevent the compromise of overt psychological operations, overt and covert operations need to be kept separate from one another. And there's also media psychological operations. Now, these type of operations convey messages via visual, audio, or audiovisual media. The largest propagator of media psychological operations come from our national media, legacy media. Military psychological operations at the tactical level are usually delivered by a loudspeaker or face-to-face communication. And for more deliberate campaigns, they may use leaflets, which back in the 20s and 30s, radio or television, or even currently the internet, which is the largest bulletin, the largest avenue for all psychological operations. Can you imagine what Nazi Germany would have done with the internet? Do you think it's ended? No. We only learned from what they learned. Read Operation Paperclip. Now, strategic operations may use social media, radio, internet, or television broadcasts, various publications, newspapers, magazines, as part of a covert operation with material placed even in foreign media outlets. Now, in order to create a successful media psychological operation, the following must be established. 1, clearly define the mission so that it aligns with the national objective. 2, it needs a psychological operation estimate of the situation. 3, prepare the plan. 4, media selection. 5, product development. 6, pre-testing, determining the probable impact of the psychological operation on the target audience. 7, production and dissemination of psychological material. 8, implementation. 9, posturing, evaluation of audience responses. 10, feedback. It's a lot on your plate, I know. There's a lot I'm giving you, a lot of material, a lot of stuff that I'm reading, a lot of stuff that I'm giving my opinions on, my thoughts. Excuse me. But in essence, the intense situation and the intense saturation of violence in our daily life needs to be addressed before we destroy ourselves. And we're heading in that direction. And it will be on our own hands. The most successful psychological operation from the U.S. federal government is having the people believe that destroying ourselves will give us peace in the end. Thus, the weapon of choice is simply a means to use and not the cause. The cause usually is bigger than the means, and it always will be. Well, we must confront and understand the important factors which are not being addressed by the global audience. The psychology of violence, which is often manufactured by the set influences I'm talking about today, and from the psychology of the self. In other words, we have to change from within to make the real change outward in order to save ourselves from the people who want to destroy us. I hope this message reaches the most of you, and I hope you think about what is really happening in the American consciousness today. And I hope this message finds you in good health, physical and mental well-being. Good night, everybody.